functioned ever since I have moved to Canada. Nepali as a national language, I was educated through Nepali as a medium of instruction. So I developed a proficiency in the Nepali language as well. And as I am from Nepal, it's obvious that I embody Nepali accent. So that's what I call Nepali English. So I do still speak Nepali English. In the meantime, I do speak world Englishes. That means I tend to bring accents from multiple places I have been to. So the language, or the linguistic repertoire, it keeps changing on the one hand. And on the other hand, when we talk about an individual multilingual repertoire, these languages are not separate. So as you can see, all these languages are, they are in my head. So they just keep moving. They are not compartmentalized. They are not different rooms in my head for all these languages. I don't necessarily think when I'm going to use Bajika. When I'm talking with my parents, it comes automatically. When I am in Nepal, or when I'm communicating with Nepali-speaking colleagues, it automatically comes. And sometimes, I tend to mix all these languages. Sometimes, I use mix Bajika and Nepali English when at home. Generally, when I'm with my wife and my family members. So all these languages goes alongside. That is what I mean by multilingualism for an individual. Moving on, linguistic diversity, multilingualism, and how that creates or that makes meaning for social justice. Linguistic diversity has always been reality, but has been strengthened by the process of globalization. Some people argue that we are living in the super diversity of the 21st century. In the meantime, some people argue that linguistic diversity has always been the reality. I think some people are raising hand. Is there an issue?
Yeah, Pramod, we cannot see your slides. We're still in the second slide.
Can you see the third slide?
No, we can't. It's stuck there. First slide.
Oh. This is technology. We are in the age of technology. Okay. Let me. That's you. Can you see now?
Yeah, it's fine now.
Okay.
Thanks.
Right. Okay. Thanks for letting me know where I was. Okay. I was talking about multilingual. Okay. I was here. Okay. I was talking about the linguistic diversity. How some scholars argue linguistic diversity. Or when they specifically use the term super diversity, they think it's a new term. However, some of the scholars believe that it has always existed, and of course, linguistic diversity has always been the reality. We could even say that a large number of languages have been displaced, or they're already killed, or they are sleeping. Right. So the number of languages has in fact decreased. So we can say the linguistic diversity is not really, a new thing. However, when I say it has been strengthened by the process of globalization, that means more a kind of spatial reality. So when, particularly in one given space, the diversity has increased. For example, in Kathmandu, when people are moving from different parts of Nepal, the diversity has increased. Similarly, for example, in Canada, when people are coming in from different countries with different languages and ethnicity and different culture, the linguistic and cultural diversity has, of course, increased. When the linguistic diversity increases, there is a possibility of hierarchy in the diversity. And when there is hierarchy in the diversity, there are always the issues of social justice and social injustice. When certain languages are endowed with more power, when certain languages are considered to have more symbolic values, or when those languages are recognized in what Pierre Bourdieu calls linguistic marketplace, these languages, tend to substitute the other languages. And that's what I mean by unequal languages. So when the languages are not equal, in what way, what constitute linguistic diversity, that becomes problematic. That's what the distinction is, not neutral but political. So when we create power dynamics between languages, this is not a neutral process. This is not something that automatically happens. It's always political. There are always some forces in the background who are playing their parts in deciding what languages are going to have the functions or more symbolic functions in the community. So, when we are living in the linguistic diversity, there are linguistic identity, linguistic skills, and then there are biases. As I said, the biases are based on, our identity. Like, for example, I'm in Canada, I do speak English, I teach the English language here, but it's still like, I sometimes like my identity as a non-native English speaker becomes problematic. So in some contexts, like I may be discriminated, or I don't say maybe, I have been discriminated based on my linguistic identity. So that's a kind of reality. And these linguistic discriminations have intersectional phenomenon. What I mean by intersectionality is discrimination is always based on gender, ethnicity, and class, and sometimes the combination of different identities, like someone coming from Nepal who is a female and non-native speaker, non-native English speaker, that person is racialized based on her gender and her ethnicity and her linguistic background. There are mismatches between actual multilingual realities and the norm. So I'll come back to this when I talk about the Nepali context, like what is the real reality of Nepal and what is the norm, what kind of norm the elite policymakers have created in Nepal, and who has in fact owned in this political game. So when there is a distinction between what languages exist and what languages are recognized or what languages are institutionalized. So in that process, who is really winning the game? Who is really, gaining benefits? So in all this process, the elite policymakers, and there are also, elite narratives that make distinction between diverse and deficit. So, there are some narratives that, define some languages as deficit. They believe these some languages do not have potential to be used across domains, for example, in education or media. So I'll come back to these issues. So moving on, like Ingrid Peeler, if you have read her book, she's a well-known scholar. She published a book called Linguistic Diversity and Social Justice in 2016, where she talks about the monolingual habitus of multilingual schools. So we all know that the majority of you are teachers, and your schools are multilinguals. The children who come to your school, of course, speak different languages. They come from different linguistic backgrounds, but the monolingual habitus still exists. When I say habitus is a network of dispositions, a network of beliefs, so belief systems. So we still have monolingual belief system. We do not allow students to speak their languages sometimes, or the language policy which we have, or which a particular school has created, or the particular municipality has created, becomes an obstacle for multilingual speakers to utilize their multilingual linguistic repertoire or resources. So we kind of tend to reject multilingualism, and rejecting multilingualism has two dimensions. First, I will talk about one, which is the past model of nationalist ideology. When I say past model of nationalist ideology, that doesn't mean the nationalist ideology doesn't exist. It does exist. There are some scholars I don't remember exactly the day, but he said that a nationalist ideology is no more. However, I believe nationalist ideology for a context like Nepal is still very strong, and I will show that when I talk about the Nepali context. So when we are driven by the nationalist ideology, we tend to ignore the pragmatic solutions, the real solutions of the classrooms. Like there are the problems that when we use the languages our students do not understand in the classroom, that's going to create several problems, including the comprehension crisis, as well as their linguistic identity crisis, but we do not tend to fix that. So we need to really think about, if you are researching on the language planning and policy issues, you really need to think about what languages are used and whose languages those are, and in what context. So we need to really think about the language regime and state traditions. So what is language regime? When we say language regime, it refers to language practices as well as conceptions of languages and language use as projected through state policies and as acted upon by the language users, right? So how the particular language regime create a kind of state traditions. When I say state traditions, what kind of policies are created, by the policymakers. And when when the state traditions are very much into monolingual habitus, it creates one language, one nation notion that, and that creates inequalities for the people whose languages is not the so-called one language. And that creates a context of dis-citizenship. Dis-citizenship means, you are not in, you are out of the game. So we need to also think about who is afraid of multilingualism in education. If in Nepal, we do have mother tongue-based multilingual education policy for about two decades. That was made in 1990s. But we are still worried about why the policy is not, effectively implemented. So we really need to think about who is afraid, who is not letting it happen. Now, when we talk about monolingual ideologies, we really need to think about submersion education versus multilingual education. So when we talk about EMI, many of you are interested, and you have been reading about English medium instruction policy, which is a kind of submersion education. So in submersion education, the medium of instruction is not necessarily the language the students speak, or the languages of, or they're not the home language or not the mother tongues of the student, but that is a kind of the dominant language. So what happens in submersion education, and why we are not into the multilingual education? Okay, and how submersion education or multilingual education make a meaning for our overall language ecology. When I say language ecology, that means how a particular language exists in relation to other languages. So how multiple languages live with one another. So how these monolingual habitus influence our language ecology. Next. Okay, so as I said, when we talk about the multilingualism in the 21st century, we really need to talk about the developmental agenda, because our language policy is always, guided by the national developmental agenda or individual national agenda. So language always has a utopian aspiration. Utopian aspiration means, we create a kind of dream that, if I learn this language, I'm going to achieve this. For example, if I learn English, I'm going to get jobs, in international market. So, we really need to think about developmental agenda and then neoliberalism. So neoliberalism is, economic doctrine. So it's a kind of free economy market. like in Nepal, if the boarding schools, what we call locally boarding schools, are elite private schools. So they are examples of neoliberal, institutionalization in Nepal. So when we are living in neoliberal era, that creates different kinds of language ideologies, policies, and practices, and that is always guided by, the aspiration to achieve socio-economic benefits in the future. And that has, again, similar discourses of inequalities, as I discussed about, the nationalist agenda. I will now move on to the Nepali context. So I believe the majority of you are from Nepal, so I don't really need to explain, much about or the much background of Nepal. But I will briefly talk about the education and the minoritized of children. So there's one report I would like to draw your attention at, is a report published in 2014 from Nepal Early Grade Reading Assessment, where the report revealed that 37% of second graders and 19% of third graders could not read a single sentence. And the lowest mean score and highest jury scores were seen among children from those vulnerable groups, especially Madhesi children from Tarai Eco Belt. So, why children, even, in grade 3 or 4, are not able to decode the texts? Why they are not able to read the text? Why they are not able to understand the text is, because of our, monolingual language policies. That has a relation to the historical language policy. So I will briefly talk about the nationalist language policy that was institutionalized in 1956. So Nepal's National Education Policy Commission that was formed in 1956 made a very explicit provision that the use of national language can bring equity among all classes of people, and that would anchor, or that would build a Nepalese nationality. That's why all languages spoken, all other languages than Nepali should be discouraged at school. So that created a very kind of linguistic genocide in our educational discourses, that anyone speaking other languages than Nepali, were not, were dis-citizen. They were the victim of dis-citizenship because their language was not recognized and they did not feel they were in, right? They were really, thrown out. So the hegemony of Nepali was further reinforced during the Partyless panchayat regime, about the, we call Mahendra Mala, or what, during the Mahendra's regime, he enforced the Muluki Ain, and that was the another institutional state regime or state tradition to citizenship all other linguistic minority groups. So that continued until 1990s, but there are some incidents that took place between 1950s and 1990s. Some groups, some ethno-linguistic groups, conducted some movements to institutionalize their languages. For example, like Nepal Bhasha movement that initiated in 1926. But that was set up in 1926 in Calcutta, but that was very active during the later decades of the 20th century. Similarly, the Hindi language movement in Madhesh was led by Nepal Tarai Congress in 1951. There was another group called Nepal People's Front in 1976. So they all together created a kind of resistance. They came on the street. They even led lots of programs to lead.
Yeah. To speak, don't speak. You can yeah.
To lead. Okay, I think someone is. Okay, what I was saying is, collectively these ethno-linguistic groups, threaten, not, that's not the right term, threaten, but and they are kind of let the regime know that they are not happy with the language policy they have. So eventually in the 1990, when the new constitution was promulgated, it was said Nepali as Rashtrako Bhasha, the language of nation, and all other languages as Rashtriya Bhasha. So this was a kind of politically correctness. So the constitution in fact recognized all languages spoken within the territory of Nepal as national language. However, the state gave Nepali as a special status. That's called Nepali as Rashtrako Bhasha. So again, there was the link through language, through the politically correctness or correct use of language, they tend to make the linguistic hierarchy between Nepali and all other languages. However, the government of Nepal really seemed positive towards multilingualism, and different committees were formed to establish mother tongue based multilingual education policy in Nepal. So although there was no explicit policy for MTB MLE, however, the government was trying to exercise, the government was trying to show their positive attitude towards the establishment of the policy. That's why during 1990s, that was after I guess 1996, the government tried to produce textbooks in multiple local languages. However, as Professor Yogendra Yadav has always problematized, those textbooks were not originally developed, but they were just translated from Nepali into multiple languages. And there was a risk of perpetuating the dominant culture, although the different languages were used. So the good side was that the constitution recognized the discourse, the potential of different languages, and there were some positive steps, onward to institutionalize these languages. However, it took several years. In fact, in 2007, the government of Nepal developed a program called Multilingual Education Program for all non-English speaking students at primary schools of Nepal. I should let you know that when this program was implemented, this was with the financial and technical support from Finnish government, the government of Finland. They provided all the support, and the financial, the finance run out in 2009, I guess. And after that, the program could not run successfully. However, some NGOs and INGOs which are really committed towards multilingual education in Nepal try to sustain a few of those schools. And as according to the report of mother tongue based multilingual education in 2012, there were only like 15 or 16 schools survived from survived with this policy. I would like to draw your attention at two ironic incidents that took place in 2007 and 8. While in 2007, the government of Nepal implemented a mother tongue based multilingual education policy. In the same year, the national curriculum of Nepal made a declaration that mother tongue will be the medium of elementary education. The medium of school level education can be, I have highlighted, can be in Nepali or English language or both of them. However, in the first stage of elementary education, the medium of education will generally be in mother tongue. So the provision was made for the use of English as a medium of instruction as early as 2007. So my question, I always question this point, that when a government is, wholeheartedly trying to, institutionalize or try to establish a mother tongue based multilingual education policy, why do you, create a window for English language as a medium of instruction, where the country moved into a neoliberal, neoliberal era in 1990s. After 1990s, our country has predominantly exercising neoliberal practices. And that's where the private schools mushroomed after 1919, and they have been practicing English medium instruction. And we knew that people had some longing for English medium instruction. So in that context, if you are really supportive to mother tongue based multilingual education, why you need to create such window, right? So this was a policy loophole, we call policy loophole, for the use of English language as a medium of instruction in 2007. And I very strongly believe that this legislation was one of the reasons of the failure or ineffective implementation of mother tongue based multilingual education in Nepal today. So what is happening now? So that was the case in 2007, and the government still says, the government is still trying to successfully implement mother tongue based multilingual education policy. If you read the documents or the text of the government of Nepal, that's the first statement. The government always say, we are in the multilingual country, we need to promote multilingualism. But there is always a distinction between what they say and what they do. So look at this road map of medium of instruction that was produced by the Ministry of Education in 2015. So according to this roadmap, they proposed a different approach to medium of instruction policy, and this approach has been recognized in the 2019 educational language policy of Nepal. If you have read the educational language policy of Nepal, you will see similar kind of provisions made there. I will talk about that as well. So they made a kind of provision that early ECD and grade 1 to 3 mother tongue will be they never say will be, they say can be. Can be means like it can be, it cannot be. If you want, use it. If you don't, you don't use it. That kind of meaning I would understand if I do discourse analysis of the term can be or will be. So from grade 4 to 8, consolidation of mother tongue and Nepali. So the Nepali would gradually be implemented as mother tongue. 6 to 8, consolidation of Nepali and transition to English medium of instruction. So now you can see gradually the government is moving on towards the English language, right? So now they are making explicit provision for the use of English. Grade 9 to 12, continuation of mother tongue and Nepali as language subjects and introduction of English as medium of instruction, mainly science, mathematics, and computer sciences. I have heard many, people even, telling me that it would be a better idea that if we teach mathematics and science through English because they are more technical subjects. But, I would really, I think very differently. I don't think, we should do that because the subjects like science, mathematics, or computer science, they require students to have more mental exercises. So any activities or any subjects in which our students require more mental exercises, that should be always done in their mother tongue. They would never be able to do complex concepts, or they cannot deal with the complex concepts in the language they are not familiar with, or the language they have not mastered yet. So we should not be really prioritizing these subjects through English MOI. Of course, they think university education should be English medium and no formal education. Okay, I'll don't talk about that. Okay, so up to now, in what direction Nepal's language in education policy is heading? Do you believe that we are moving towards a mother tongue based multilingual education policy, or we are moving a transitional model of mother tongue based multilingual education policy? What I mean by transitional model is, first we teach through mother tongue, then we move to national language, then we move to international language. That is a transitional model of multilingual education, which I must, say that from many of the African contexts, that model has failed. That has not been successful. While speaking to, policymakers in Nepal, I have always been saying that, the traditional model of multilingual policy may not work in Nepal, and we do not have any research yet, whether that can work. So, we should be cautious before we, move on with that. Okay, so, it's somehow clear that we are prioritizing more English. Of course, Nepali is still there. We have not forgotten the Nepali. Nepali as a so-called national language. This is not only the national language, but there is a narrative in Nepal that people say Nepali भनेको राष्ट्रको भाषा हो, Nepali भनेको राष्ट्रिय भाषा हो. So still we think Nepali as a national language. So that is still there. In addition to Nepali as a national, Nepali defined within a nationalist agenda, neoliberalism is playing a very big role. So as you can see here, I say, if you are feeling sad and if you are depressed, someone said you might be suffering from capitalism. So what is happening in Nepal, and if we are in the contestation of linguistic policy in Nepal, that is played a big role, that has a big role played from capitalist mindset. So the result is the growth of English as a medium of instruction. And when there is medium of instruction policy is being implemented increasingly in public school, that is created social stratification based on who has the resources to afford EMI schools, who do not. So based on the resources available to them, that is creating social stratification. In the meantime, my own research along with the other Nepali scholars' research has clearly shown that because of the implementation of English as a medium of instruction policy in Nepal, children are not really learning. Their learning is impacted, as well as it causes comprehension crisis. I have already mentioned that, as well as the linguistic identity crisis. There is public-private divide in Nepal, as you know that, and that is again, a discourse of social stratification. So in Nepal, we consider English as a cultural paradigm. What I mean by cultural paradigm is, everyone believes English is the only language that could help us. English is the only language that everybody should be learning, and that is the way out of our marginalization socially or economically. So as you can see, I have got some snapshots from the newspapers. They Padhaima Charam Vived. So this report is again based on how one particular school is practicing two different medium of instruction, creating the social divisions. Angrezima padhnelai diuso, Nepalima bihana. So same school is practicing two different systems. So we can say one school, two systems. So when one school practices two systems, it's very clear that the two systems serve to two different social groups, right? So when say one school is offering to two different social groups, we need to really think about the distinction between these two different social groups and the quality of education these two different social groups are receiving. That is very important issue, I guess, of language and education policy that we should be researching on. Now, so as I said, we have not forgotten Nepali. Nepali is still predominantly used in education, and English is, taking on a very, strong role. So we have English-Nepali bilingualism, which I always say is an elite construct in the social discourses as well. It's not only in education, it's also in social discourses. In the meantime, I always think that English, has been naturalized in Nepal. So, as you know, sometimes we hardly, can speak without using English words, right? So we unintentionally tend to use English words, when we are speaking in Nepali or other local languages, right? And that is, displayed in the linguistic landscape as well. As you can see in the first picture, how romantic so. So as you can notice, there is, how romantic talk written in English, as well as the same thing is translated into Nepali. But these words are not Nepali. how romantic talk in Devanagari script is still English words. That makes lots of sense that how naturalized English has become in Nepal. Similarly, in the second picture, smart eyes. English words, smart eyes, chasma pasal. So smart eyes, again English words in Devanagari script, chasma pasal, Devanagari script, but still, but they are Nepali words. So this is a very good example of translanguaging, or how different languages are, mixed, or how the combination of multiple languages has created a, linguistic landscape in Nepal. And what, meaning that makes for education. I always think, that what we think about education is always driven by the social discourses. So what we see in the society, for example, like, someone from a village go to town and sees, English signboards, wording boards everywhere, then that person believes, what's the use of the local languages? We need to really know the English language in order to survive, right? So that, creates a kind of that.
खै विकली भने जस्तो लाग्यो डिपार्टमा चाहिँ म फेरि चेक गर्छु अनि तपाईहरुले चाहिँ डेली बुझाउनु पर्ने हो
Can I ask to mute?
Pushpaji, can you mute? Pushpa sir?
It's not me, sir.
No, that's why I'm saying who is that.
Okay, let me bring the participant.
Okay.
Okay, anyway, I'll continue. I have lots of things to say here. As you can see in the third picture, I clicked this picture from a rural part of Nepal. As you can see, this boy, as you can imagine, he's not from an elite family, but what he is embodying. So, we embody the language. We all know that, right? Sometimes we, display the linguistic ideology through what we are embodying, or what, or how we show through our body. So this boy, as you can see, is wearing a t-shirt printed with chill bro, right? So again, the bro, it's a term, it's an English word, but, Devanagari script and predominantly used among the teenagers or youngsters. So, how all these ideas are coming from, and how collectively these ideas inform our educational practices. This is something, many of these scholars can research on. So how these social discourses are making connection to language in education policy in Nepal. Similarly, as you know, media discourse has very, very strong impact on our daily lives and daily attitudes. So I'm just giving one example from Nepal Idol, as you can, but you can see such kind of linguistic practices across many programs on Nepali media. So in 2017, I just did this analysis from a video from 2017 where the host said, "Swagat cha yaharu sapailai, yo Nepalko #1 reality show, Oppo Camera Phone presents Nepal Idol powered by blah blah blah." So as you can see, starting with Nepali, and continuing the English, and then again the second host says, "Guys, congratulations for making it to the top 6 of Nepal Idol. Nepal Idol को grand finale जति जति नजिकै छ, प्रतिस्पर्धीहरूको संख्या पनि घट्दै छ, तर दर्शकको कौतूहलता बढ्दै छ." So you can see, that this translanguaging practice is very much predominant in media discourse as well. So and sometimes you think the English is used more than Nepali. We know that besides English and Nepali, other languages are hardly used in the media, but these two languages are predominantly used, and they are used, in translanguaging mode. So this makes another case of a study that we need to understand. Another thing that this is also related to the linguistic landscape. We know the brand Gold Star is a Nepali brand. I always think why they write Gold Star in English. One thing. Another thing, why do they say Gold Star? Both, it's English word. So what kind of ideology has developed in Nepal that we tend to, use English words as brand name? This is predominantly used in educational discourses as well. As you can see in Kathmandu, if you tell me a few names of private campuses or colleges, Pentagon, White House, what are the other? There are many more, right? They all are taken from the American names. So this gives us another perspective to understand the cultural phenomenon, mediated through Western knowledge or the Western languages. So up to now, we can think about, is the whole country moving toward English? This is a really big question. And I sometimes think, yes, the whole country is moving toward English. And then we need to think, how is the English-Nepali bilingualism associated with elite identity and hence inequalities of multilingualism? If English-Nepali bilingualism is institutionalized, and as you can see, this has been institutionalized or recognized as more, valid or more in relation to the social or cultural capital. So how this has created the elite identity? So how people, the minority people or the poor people or ethno-linguistic, groups, they now think they need to learn English-Nepali bilingualism in order to achieve affiliation to elite identity. Or if they want to move into what we call middle class society, they need to learn English-Nepali bilingualism. And when we have this perspective, as I discussed in theoretical parts, we can imagine how this creates inequalities of multilingualism for local languages. Now I'll briefly move on Indo-Nepal relations and the discourse of Hindi. I won't spend much time on that, this discourse. But why I choose to talk about this is to convey a message that nationalist ideology has not dead. Nationalist language ideology is still there. Or so I went to Janakpur last year to visit Janaki Mandir, and I clicked the picture there. So you can see here, you can see here 3 languages, have been used. So ticket counter, English and Nepali words. As you can see here, note, 5 वर्ष भन्दा माथिको बालबालिकाहरूको टिकट लाग्नेछ, 5 वर्ष ऊपर के बच्चों का टिकट लगेगा. So you can see the Hindi language is used there. So when a particular language is used in a given linguistic landscape, we cannot say that language does not belong to that space. Based on this, I don't, I can't claim, or I don't, or I'm not in a position to say Hindi does not belong to this particular space. And Hindi is spoken by 77,000 people of Nepal according to the census 2021. Hindi was the language of education in Madhesh until the government of Nepal imposed Nepali in mid-1950s. And as you remember, I mentioned that there was a movement by some groups in Madhesh to institutionalize Hindi as a medium of instruction in school, because Hindi was more comfortable language for them at that time, which is not the case now. After several decades, Hindi may not be used as an appropriate medium of instruction in Nepal, because not many children would fancy that. However, what I mean to say is Hindi has always been there for centuries. So the Hindi belongs to that particular space. But why there's a discourse of hating Hindi language in Nepal is because of the Indo-Nepal relationship. It's not to demotivate the people in Tarai who speak Hindi languages, but because of the discourse that has created, coming from the contested relationship between Nepal, the diplomatic relationship between Nepal and India. And this discourse has, in fact, I always say, tactfully created for some benefits. We know that the political parties or the elite governments always create some kind of propaganda for their own benefits. For example, to win the election, or for example, to promote promote the agenda of their own party. So in that process, the interrelationship between Nepal and India is contested, as well as there could be the reason that India has always been trying to bully Nepal in several sense. So that could be one of the reasons that people hate India, and people tend to associate Hindi to India, and they don't see Hindi as a local language in Nepal, and that's where the nationalist ideology come for Hindi. That could be another case for many people to study. So Sansad Jhako Hindi Sambodhan. So this has come across several times in Nepali media, that someone is speaking Nepali in political discourse has always been criticized. Okay, so how does nationalist agenda or propaganda influence the local language ecology? So this is another question for many for researchers to pursue their research, so we can try to understand this discourse. Now I will move on, very important, and I think we need to discuss this very importantly, because that makes a direct connection to post-COVID era that I will talk about. So China as emerging global power and Chinese language in Nepal. So we all know that China has big, I think it is always claimed as the second most powerful country in the world now, and it is of course emerging global power, and the Chinese language is aggressively being used in Nepal, or it has aggressively entered in Nepal. So what connection could this context have for Nepal's language ecology? So I talked about neoliberal policy, and then when we talk about neoliberal policy, this China Dream and Belt and Road Initiative makes a very good connection. Because of the neoliberal movement, the Chinese government has provided lots of economic benefits to Nepal that has both negative and positive aspects. The positive aspect is it's always a good idea for a poor country like Nepal that we can boost our economy through economic support. In the meantime, we need to be watchful at in what way they are giving us the economic support, and at what cost. If we are receiving economic benefits from them, what are we losing? So we need to really think about that. So according to the policy of Chinese Dream, it clearly states that a framework to rejuvenate the nation, including the promotion of the Chinese language and culture. So one of the agenda of the Road and Belt Initiative is to promote their own language as well as the culture. We know when a language is promoted, the culture comes automatically. A language and culture is never separated. So one of the goals of Belt and Road Initiative is to bolster people-to-people connection by cultivating student, expert, and cultural exchanges and tourism. And in this process, Chinese language plays a big role. So, I'll show you some pictures from the Linguistic Landscape of Kathmandu Valley, which I collected last year. So as you can see this picture, there is Chinese character and Nepali character. So is it simply China aid? So I always ask a question. So what is coming with the Chinese financial support? Along with the Chinese financial support, the Chinese language is coming in Nepal. So of course, this flyover was built by China, but alongside, with this bridge, there has come the Chinese language in Nepal. So we really need to think about, in what ways this is going to make relation to, the linguistic landscape of Nepal. I'm not necessarily criticizing, but I'm just, kind of giving a heads up to someone who, can research on this. And, we really need to think about this, This made me more, thoughtful when I went to the Rar Square and I saw, there the restoration was going on. However, the pictures or the signages were all in English and Chinese characters, and that made me really sad. Personally, that may not be the case of other people, but I was personally sad to see, Nepali and English and Chinese characters at our World Heritages, where the local languages, for example, Nevari or even Nepali, these languages were missing. This is very strong message for all of us. When I was, returning back to Canada from Nepal, I saw this signage at, international airport, Nepal's through an international airport, in the queue for foreigners. So, there is English word and Chinese word, right? When I travel internationally, to a non-English speaking country, I always see, in majority of cases, I do see their local languages, but I did not see the use of local languages. When I say local languages, it includes Nepali as well. So I did not see that. And, the emergence of Chinese character in this discourse is very new in Nepal. So this, is giving a sense that, in what ways Chinese language would replace the other languages in future, what's going to happen in maybe 20 years, 30 years, ahead. So in the meantime, in our schools, as you know, Chinese is predominantly being taught. We really need to also think about whether we are demanding the Chinese language at school, or someone else is offering us Chinese language, free of cost. So in Nepal, like Chinese volunteer teachers come to our school, they approach to schools and they say they want to teach the Chinese language at schools. Not necessarily the school's approach or the school, make a call for Chinese teachers. This happened like several years ago. I'm not sure what's happening in 2020. You are there, so you may well know about this. So when Chinese language is being taught, the Chinese culture comes along with the children are taught the Chinese culture. So when we know that because of the overemphasis of English in Nepal, children tend to embody English language a lot. So tend to, as if you're walking down the streets in Kathmandu, and if you walk past teenagers, you can see, even though they are speaking Nepali, you feel like they're speaking in English. The Nepali language always, is spoken in English tone. So this is because of the overemphasis of English in our education system. So this really makes me think what would happen in future when, our children are being, exposed more to Chinese culture, at the cost of Nepali culture. So, I'm not, I'm not criticizing, but again, I'm indicating some of the concerns that can have meaning for the future. So how will the improved diplomatic relations with China create a discourse of the Chinese language in Nepal? We all know after the Communist Party came into power in Nepal, because of their political alignment, they have a very, they have improved diplomatic relationship, which is very positive. And I'm really, happy with that, because the improved diplomatic relationship with our neighbors would always enhance our economic capacity. So this is very positive. In the meantime, we need to really think about, the Chinese language, how the Chinese language, can create its own discourse in Nepal when, because of this improved diplomatic relations, Chinese language is predominantly being used in Nepal. Now, finally, I come to post-COVID era. So, as DNG mentioned in the very beginning that, the game is not over, right? We are still, I don't even say in midway through. We don't know how long it's going to take place, how long, our life is going to be impacted by the COVID-19. We don't know anything yet. But, as I say in the title, sensing. So, we can really sense. Like in Nepal, we have a saying that "Hune birwako chilo pat." So in the very beginning of an incident, we can really sense what can happen in future, although that may not, come true, in due course. However, we can talk about this. We can bring this in our, discussion. So let's think about three different, ideas, during this pandemic. What is happening now? So even before pandemic, we knew that domestic conflicts in Europe and North America, especially the US, and the possibility of a decline in their global hegemony. So after the Brexit, we know the economy of the UK has declined because of the domestic conflicts in the US and because of the political instability or the political conflicts going on in the US. Their economy is a kind of a decline, and when a country's economy is declined, their hegemony is declined, because we are living in the era of capitalism. So people, or an individual or a country which has more capital or which has more economy has more hegemony, more power. So this is the philosophy in the 21st century. So, what is going to happen? And now China, is an emerging global power after the US. So what would happen if the economy of US declines and the China has, in the politics of this COVID-19, China seems to, have recovered from this pandemic. So they, their economy does not look like, going down. They will, in fact, enhance their economy, and they are selling all the masks. They are selling the ventilators. They are selling, other, medical materials to different parts of the world. So they are in fact boosting their economy in a sense, while the European countries and America are losing their economy. So in this case, there is a possibility that China can surpass the US. What would happen in that case? The pandemic is likely destroying the economy of Europe, as I said, and Britain. And when I say about this, we need to really think about Britain, because Britain receives the highest revenue through selling the English language, often through British Council, like, for example, IELTS tests, or selling the textbooks from Cambridge, Oxford publications. So they make lots of revenue because of the market of the English language. So what would happen in future when British or Britain, has a declined economy? So what, relations this phenomenon can have for language education in future? So when we think about, and in the meantime, we really need to think about post-human activities. And I really think, I really want all of you to, think about what is happening at this moment from a post-human or non-human perspective. So as you can see in the picture, and as it has been reported widely, when the countries or cities are locked down, wild animals are coming out on the street. What meaning does it make? So we know that we have captured as a superior, animals, right? We have destroyed their habitus, and we are kind of like do not give them the equal space. So we have narrowed down their space. So now they are freely moving into the cities, and they are freely enjoying the equal space while we are in the locked in. So what sense this could give to language educators? We really need to think about, our applied linguistics. We really need to think about the field of language education from post-human perspectives, how we can incorporate a human relationship with animals. Because, when we talk about language or the language ecology, or when we talk about ecology is not only about one one species, it's about multiple spaces. So we need to give space to multiple spaces. So how and in what sense that could make meaning to language in education. In the meantime, there was a news that ozone layer depletion that happened before is a kind of improving. That's a kind of improved because of the factories have closed, are closed down. The air pollution has decreased. So because of all these, decrease in the pollution, there is improvement in the atmosphere. So, in what way we can think, about the language education in future. So after post-COVID, what kind of content we want to include in our language education. Through our language education, how we can convince our children, for the relationship between the human beings and the animals and the environment we live in. I got this picture of Kathmandu Valley from a newspaper. So how beautiful it looks, during the pandemic. So it gives a lot of sense again that, what is wrong? We need to really pause and think, what is wrong with us? What mistakes we have committed and how we are suffering. So in what ways all these, happenings or all these incidents, currently taking place can be, related to language education. And I think, it's very early stage to, make a very big, bigger claim at this moment. However, what I'm thinking personally is, as language educators, we really can, develop our textbooks or teaching materials that can, develop the critical consciousness of our students about all these relations. And when we move beyond the neoliberal benefits, when we move beyond our personal developmental agendas, and when we think more spiritually, when we think more from the social, social or environmental perspectives, I think we need to consider all these activities or all these phenomena in our language education policy. So in post-human language education, as Alistair Pennycook published a book in 2017 he called Post-Humanist Applied Linguistics. So, this book, although came before this crisis, is going to revolutionize the field, I assume, because, the pandemic is really pushing all of us to really think about the post-human phenomenon. So how we are going to create our relationship with other animals, as well as the United Nations Sustainable Developmental Goals includes, or they make a call that we need to really solve environmental problems through our education system. So again, as language educators, we need to really think how we can materialize UN's call by 2030, and in this way we need to, incorporate more about the critical consciousness towards environmental issues in language in education practices. So finally, there are a few questions that we really need to think about, and maybe this question may be researched. So will English be replaced? It's a very, very big question, huge question. Like, we don't have answer yet, but this is really a serious concern. If China becomes the most powerful economically, in this world, there is a possibility that English may be dementalized, or English may be replaced. I don't know yet. And if that happens, what guarantees that the next language will not mediate inequalities? So now we really have to be prepared, as language educators, or if you are language policymakers, we really need to be prepared. What would happen if English is going to be replaced with, for example, the Chinese language? What is going to guarantee us that Chinese would not play the same role as English has played to create inequalities in our society? So we really need to be prepared for future. Has the pandemic made us realize the importance of local languages and environmental, diversity? So, as we all are, locked down in lockdown, that we are practicing the home languages, we are practicing the local languages a lot at this moment. So we need to think about, the importance of local languages, how important it is to share our emotional values to our family members. I bet when you are, sharing about this pandemic with your family members, with your kids, with your friends, you are using your local languages or your mother tongues. So, how important mother tongues can be for this kind of incident or this kind of crisis, that we need to really express or negotiate our understanding, and the mother tongues are really important. In the meantime, we really need to think about the environmental diversity. Thank you so much.